Hello Midnights. We hope you enjoy our stories. Next one, the Annoxi close-in. Simone's group gambles on a cryptic map, a terrifying military base, and an evolving, conscious threat. Let us know where you are listening from and don't forget to subscribe. The air tasted of iron and rot, a cloying blend that clung to the back of your throat, each breath a reminder of the world's decay. The skeletal remains of buildings clawed at the bruised sky, their shattered windows like vacant eyes staring down at the carnage below. It had been years since the turning, since the world had choked on its own fevered nightmare, twisting flesh into grotesque parodies of life. We, the scattered remnants of humanity, were left to scavenge in the ruins, each sunrise a gamble, each sunset a reprieve from the horrors that stalked the shadows. Our sanctuary, a once proud department store, now resembled a gaping maw, its innards spilling onto the ravaged streets of what was once a bustling town in the American Midwest. The glass lay in jagged teeth, reflecting the sickly green fungal blooms that pulsed with a life of their own, consuming the city's corpse. We were 12 souls, tethered together by a fragile thread of hope, led by Simone, a woman etched with the grim artistry of survival. Her eyes, once filled with the quiet knowledge of a librarian, now held the cold calculation of a seasoned predator. Hunger was a constant companion, gnawing at our bellies, a relentless reminder of our precarious existence. Yesterday, Jax, the youngest among us, had ventured out for supplies and never returned. We knew his fate. The Bjinars, as we called them, were not the mindless move and K of old tales. They moved with a terrifying, unnatural speed, their eyes burning with a hunger that transcended mere flesh. Some retained echoes of their former lives, a horrifying mimicry of human behavior that made them all the more unsettling. A flicker of recognition in their dead eyes, a faint moan that sounded like a name, or the way a Bjinar might trace the outline of a child's forgotten toy on a dusty shelf. These were the details that truly haunted the survivors. They were constant reminders of the thin, terrifying line between what they were and what we still were, a line that felt like it could dissolve at any moment. But the Bjinars were not our only enemy. There were others, the survivors, the ones who embraced the chaos, who reveled in the brutality of this new world. The Annoxi, a nomadic horde of savages, had been sighted in the district. They were not content with mere scavenging, they took what they wanted, and they took people. Whispers of their cruelty echoed through the ruins, tales of unspeakable acts that made the blood run cold, forced gladiatorial contests in crumbling stadiums, families enslaved to clear paths through rubble, and the chilling rumor of a harvest of the uninfected, their purpose unknown but widely feared. The Bjinars were not a uniform threat, they manifested in disturbing variations, each more nightmarish than the last. The most common were the move and K, their skin a pallid gray or greenish hue, stretched taut over emaciated frames. Their eyes, once filled with human light, were now clouded with a milky film, or sometimes, a disturbing, vacant black. Their movements were jerky, uncoordinated, driven by an insatiable hunger, a constant, low-growl rumbling in their chests. They were the most numerous, a perpetual, shuffling tide of decay. Then there were the runners, a truly terrifying evolution. Their muscles were distended, their limbs elongated, allowing them to move with an unnerving, predatory sprint. Their jaws were often unhinged, revealing rows of sharpened teeth, and their eyes glowed with a feral intensity. They were the hunters, the ones who could chase down a desperate survivor in open ground. The most disturbing, however, were the grave minders. These were rare, but their existence was a testament to the grotesque ingenuity of the plague. They were almost immobile, bloated and distended, often fused with the very ground or rubble around them by grotesque fungal growths. Their minds, however, seemed to retain a terrifying, rudimentary intelligence. They acted as a sort of hive mind node, emitting a low, resonant hum that seemed to draw in other Bjinars, acting as their grotesque conductors. Their eyes, though often buried in folds of flesh, sometimes held a flicker of awareness, a malevolent curiosity that suggested they understood their role in the apocalypse. It was rumored that these were the bodies of those who had fought the infection longest, their minds twisting into a grotesque form of sentience as their bodies succumbed. Their existence, we had come to understand, was a tragic parody of life. The virus, or whatever horrific agent caused the turning, didn't simply kill. It reanimated, but it also repurposed. The Bjinars were not just automatons, they were living, decaying biomass, constantly seeking to replenish themselves, driven by an instinct far older and more primal than anything human. It was a biological imperative, a parasitic existence that fed on the living to fuel its own grotesque continuation. They were the world's immune response, purging humanity from its surface. Simone summoned us to the skeletal remains of the lingerie section, our makeshift gathering place. The air hung heavy with the ghosts of forgotten desires, a stark contrast to the brutal reality of our present. The tattered lace and faded silk, once symbols of intimacy, now felt like shrouds for a buried world. "Supplies are critical," she stated, her voice a low rasp, cutting through the morbid silence. "Our last scout reported the water purification tablets are nearly gone, and we have less than a week's worth of protein bars. The distribution center on the outskirts is our only hope. It's a gamble, but we're running out of time." A wave of dread washed over us. The distribution center was a notorious hellhole, rumored to be swarming with Bjinars and a favored hunting ground of the Annoxi. It was a sprawling complex, visible from our makeshift watchtower, a dark stain on the horizon that beckoned and repelled in equal measure. Its reputation was built on blood, few who attempted it ever returned, and those who did often carried scars far deeper than flesh wounds. But we were cornered. Our meager rations were dwindling, and the approaching winter, a brutal beast in this scarred land, was a death sentence in itself. The biting wind that already whistled through the broken windows of our sanctuary was a stark preview of the unforgiving months to come. Under a sky the color of bruised flesh, we set out. 6 of us, the most capable, the most desperate. There was Marek, a former construction worker, his strength now channeled into wielding a hefty rebar spear. Lena, a nurse before the turning, was our medic, her backpack surprisingly stocked with dwindling antibiotics and bandages. Then there was Samuel, a quiet man with an uncanny knack for mechanics, carrying a scavenged, well-oiled rifle that looked more like an extension of his arm. Rounding out the group were the twins, Chloe and Liam, nimble and silent, their youthful agility making them ideal scouts, and finally, Simone herself, leading the charge. We were armed with crude spears, scavenged firearms, and a desperate prayer. The fight to stay alive was a constant, exhausting ballet with death. Every creak of rusty metal, every distant moan, sent adrenaline surging through our veins. We moved in practiced silence, a choreography of survival. Chloe and Liam, light on their feet, would dart ahead, their hand signals quick and precise, clear, Bjinars sighted, Annoxi ahead. Samuel, with his keen ear, would listen for the telltale shuffling or the chilling thump-thump of a runner. Marek walked point, his spear sweeping for tripwires or hidden pitfalls, his immense strength a bulwark if we were swarmed. Lena, ever vigilant, kept an eye on our dwindling supplies and the subtle signs of exhaustion on our faces. Simone, always at the rear, observed, analyzed, making split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and a brutal, agonizing death. The streets were a charnel house, littered with the skeletal remains of vehicles, buses overturned like dead beetles, cars crushed into abstract sculptures of metal, and the gnawed bones of the forgotten. Each shadow held a potential threat, each distant moan a prelude to carnage. The wind carried not just dust, but the faint, metallic scent of blood and something acrid, chemical, remnants of a world that had consumed itself. We learned to distinguish between the cries of a struggling animal and the high-pitched shriek of a new Bjinar being born, a sound that always made our blood run cold. As we neared the distribution center, a monstrous concrete edifice against the dying light, its sheer scale became apparent. Its walls, once pristine, were now streaked with grime and strange, dark stains that looked eerily like dried blood. The stench of decay intensified, a putrid symphony of death that made your stomach churn, rotten flesh, mildew, and something else, something metallic and sharp, like ozone after a storm. And then we saw them. Not just the Bjinars, but a legion of them, moving with an unnerving, synchronized gait, their limbs contorted at unnatural angles, their eyes burning with a malevolent light. They were more numerous than any reports had suggested, a tide of twitching, moaning bodies. And among them, the Annoxi. Clad in scavenged riot gear, their faces hidden behind grotesque masks made from repurposed vehicle parts and skeletal remains, they moved with a chilling efficiency, herding the Bjinars, using them as a living, writhing shield. "Hello!" Guttural chant emanated from their ranks, a rhythmic, disturbing sound that resonated with the unnatural movements of the Bjinars. It was then we understood the true horror of our situation. The Annoxi were not mere raiders, they were orchestrating the apocalypse. They had found a way to control the Bjinars, not with a cure, but with some dark, unholy method, perhaps a pheromone, a specific frequency of sound, or some twisted surgical modification, turning the very nightmare of our existence into a weapon of their twisted ambition. The sheer scale of their control, the calculated way they moved the Bjinars like pieces on a macabre chessboard, was a chilling testament to their depravity and their terrifying ingenuity. Simone's grip tightened on her axe, her knuckles bone-wide against the worn leather grip. Her breath hitched. "We can't go in there," she breathed, her voice laced with a new, bone-deep despair that we rarely heard from her. "It's a slaughterhouse." The hope that had sustained us for so long, the flicker of a future beyond mere survival, seemed to extinguish in that moment. We retreated, our hearts heavy with the weight of our grim reality. The promise of warmth and sustenance slipped through our fingers like dust. The apocalypse was no longer just about survival, it was about confronting the terrifying depths of human depravity, the horrifying ways we could adapt to destruction, even embrace it. As we stumbled back towards our crumbling sanctuary, the silence was broken only by the guttural roars of the Bjinars and the chilling, triumphant laughter of the Annoxi, echoing through the desolate cityscape. This new world, a grotesque masterpiece of horror and human cruelty, was irreversible. There was no going back, only the brutal, unending fight to survive another day in a world that had truly, irrevocably, gone to hell. Back within the crumbling walls of our sanctuary, the grim discovery of the Annoxi's control over the Bjinars hung in the air like a shroud. Simone, her face a mask of weary resolve, gathered us again in the tattered lingerie section. The few working battery-powered lamps cast long, dancing shadows, making the already unsettling mannequins seem to twitch at the edges of our vision. "The distribution center is a death trap," Simone stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "We saw what they can do. Sending anyone back there is a death sentence, plain and simple." A heavy silence descended, broken only by the soft, ragged breathing of the group. Despair was a tangible thing, a cold hand tightening around our collective throat. Lena, usually the calmest, fidgeted with the strap of her empty medical pack. "But what then, Simone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, a tremor of desperation beneath it. "Winter is coming. We have enough food for maybe a week, 2 if we ration even harder. The water supply from the old pipes is almost dry. We can't stay here." Samuel, his rifle resting across his knees, stared at the floor, his face etched with grim understanding. "We could try the old industrial complex. It's further out, but it might have some salvageable machinery, maybe even old fuel." Simone shook her head, a sharp, decisive movement. "Too exposed. The Annoxi are moving, spreading their reach. We saw their numbers. If they've mastered the Bjinars, they're no longer just a threat, they're a force, an army. We can't risk a direct confrontation, not yet. Not with what little we have left." Chloe, her young face drawn with fear, her eyes wide, spoke up. "What about going underground? The old subway tunnels? Jack's always talked about how they were largely untouched." Simone's gaze hardened. "And how long would we survive down there without fresh air, without knowing what horrors lurk in the dark? It's a tomb, not a sanctuary. We'd be trapped, hunted in the pitch black." Her voice, usually so steady, carried a rare edge of raw frustration. The unspoken question hung in the air, is there any hope? The group looked to Simone, their leader, their only compass in this desolate world. Her face was etched with a new, agonizing calculation. The librarian was gone, replaced by a strategist wrestling with an impossible choice. The winter winds howled outside, a mournful dirge for a dying world, each gust a stark reminder of the rapidly dwindling time. The air in the department store grew colder, mirroring the chill that had settled in our hearts. Simone finally looked up, her gaze sweeping over each of our faces, searching, weighing. A flicker of something, a grim determination mixed with a terrifying resignation, crossed her features. "There's one option," she said, her voice barely audible, yet each word cut through the silence like a knife. "One we've always dismissed as too dangerous, too impossible." She paused, letting the suspense build, the unspoken dread clinging to every syllable, drawing out the moment with agonizing slowness. "We go to the old military base." A collective gasp, a ripple of raw, unadulterated fear, went through the group. Marek's hand instinctively went to his spear, his knuckles white. Lena paled, a faint whimper escaping her lips. The twins, usually so stoic, exchanged a terrified glance. The military base. A fortress of ghosts, rumored to be teeming with the most mutated of Bjinars, and whispered to hold a dark secret that even the Annoxi, with their terrifying control, had reportedly avoided. The very thought sent shivers down our spines. It was not a place of survival, it was a place of last resorts, a place where legends of horrors far worse than the Bjinars were born, where the very air is said to hum with a wrongness that twisted the mind. The silence that followed was suffocating, punctuated only by the distant, chilling roar of the Bjinars and the faint, triumphant laughter of the Annoxi, carried on the unforgiving wind, a macabre chorus echoing the grim decision. Simone's eyes, cold and determined, offered no comfort. She was laying bare the terrifying reality, every path led through a crucible of death, and the only choice left was which fire to walk through. The stakes had never been higher, and the very air vibrated with the weight of that decision. Just as the despair threatened to swallow them whole, a faint scratching echoed from the barricaded entrance of the department store. Every head snapped towards the sound, weapons raised instinctively. It was too soft for a Bjinar, too rhythmic for the wind. Simone signaled silence, then slowly, cautiously, approached the reinforced doors. A small, anxious rap followed, hesitant, almost apologetic. Simone exchanged a look with Marek, who gripped his spear, ready. With a creak of protest from the scavenged wood and metal, Simone carefully unbarred a small spy hatch at eye level. Through the narrow slit, illuminated by the dim, bruised twilight, stood a figure unlike any they'd seen in months. It was a young woman, no older than Chloe and Liam, perhaps 20 at most. Her face was smudged with dirt and streaked with tears, but her eyes, though wide with terror, held a desperate, unwavering spark of life. She clutched a worn, leather-bound journal to her chest like a shield. Her clothes were torn, and a thin, crimson stain marred her sleeve, but her breath came in ragged gasps, not the gurgling rattle of the infected. "Please," she choked out, her voice raw, cracked with thirst and fear. "Please, I saw your lights. I need help. They're everywhere. The Annoxi are coming." Simone's gaze, usually so unyielding, softened almost imperceptibly. This was a direct echo of their own plight, a mirror to their vulnerability. But survival had taught her caution. "Who are you?" Simone demanded, her voice low and firm, her hand hovering near her axe. "How did you find this place?" The girl shivered, her eyes darting nervously around the skeletal wreckage of the street. "My name is April. I was with a small group, scavengers. We tracked some old supply lines, but the Annoxi found us. They took the others. I ran. I just ran." She pointed a trembling hand towards the north. "They're close. Too close." Simone hesitated. Every new mouth to feed was a burden. Every new presence, a potential risk. But the raw terror in April's eyes, the sheer desperation, was undeniable. And her warning about the Annoxi, given so starkly, resonated deeply with their own recent encounter. "Open the inner gate, Lena," Simone finally commanded, her decision made. "Marek, cover the outer approach. Samuel, you're on watch from the roof. Chloe, Liam, stay sharp." As Lena cautiously slid back the heavy bolts, the scent of fear and fresh air drifted into their stale sanctuary. April stumbled inside, collapsing onto the grimy floor, still clutching her journal. Her arrival was a chaotic spark in their carefully managed despair, a sudden, unpredictable element in their grim equation for survival. But more importantly, her words confirmed Simone's chilling intuition. The Annoxi were not just moving through the district, they were actively hunting, their reach extending, making the military base a truly unavoidable last resort. The stakes had just been raised, forcing Simone's hand even further. April's presence in the sanctuary felt like a fragile flame flickering in the encroaching darkness. While Simone and the others maintained their hardened vigilance, there was a subtle shift in the air, a crack in the stoic facade they'd all adopted. April, with her youthful fragility and wide, haunted eyes, was a stark reminder of the world they'd lost, of the innocence devoured by the turning. She curled into a ball on a makeshift cot, refusing them meager rations, her grip on the journal unwavering. The silence that followed her frantic entrance was broken only by the occasional creak of the decaying building and April's own ragged breaths. Simone, ever the pragmatist, saw not just a frightened girl, but a potential resource. As Lena tended to a superficial gash on April's arm, Simone watched her closely. "What's in the journal, April?" she asked, her voice softer than usual, a subtle bait for information. April flinched, pulling the book tighter against her chest. It's maps. My father was a cartographer. He had a theory about the old world's infrastructure, hidden caches, forgotten safe zones. He believed some military facilities might have been built to withstand even this." Her voice trailed off, a fresh wave of tears welling in her eyes. "He was so meticulous. He marked everything. Escape routes, supply points. Even weaknesses." Simone's eyes narrowed, a new flicker of interest replacing some of the despair. "Weaknesses?" April nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "The ones he called blind spots. Areas where the old surveillance systems had gaps, where the fortified perimeters might have structural flaws, even during a full lockdown. He believed that even the most secure installations had them, intended as emergency access or egress for highly classified personnel, but not for this." She choked back a sob, her gaze fixed on the journal. "He called them ghost gates. Places you could slip through if you knew how to read the blueprints. This was more than just a frightened survivor. April was a key, a potential map to a way inside the unbreachable. Simone felt a surge of grim hope, quickly tempered by the realization of the immense risk. This Ghost Gate knowledge, if real, could be their only shot at the military base. But it also meant trusting a complete stranger with their lives, a stranger who had just witnessed the brutality of the Annoxi firsthand. The thought of what they might be able to find inside the base, armed with such knowledge, was almost intoxicating, a counterpoint to the dread that had been their constant companion. The game had changed. The revelation of April's journal cast a strange, fragile light over the group. The military base, once a suicide mission, now held a sliver of desperate possibility. But with that possibility came a new tension, a subtle discord. That night, as the others slept fitfully, their dreams haunted by the cries of the Bjinars and the mocking laughter of the Annoxi, Simone found Samuel meticulously cleaning his rifle. The familiar click of the bolt echoed loudly in the quiet. "You don't trust her," Simone stated, not a question. Samuel didn't look up, his eyes fixed on the gleaming barrel. "She appeared out of nowhere, Simone. Just when we're at our lowest, and she happens to have the one thing that could get us into the one place we've always avoided?" He finally met her gaze, his eyes shadowed with suspicion. "It's too convenient. What if she's a scout? A plant? The Annoxi are smart, Simone. They play games," Simone sighed, rubbing her temples. The exhaustion was a dull ache behind her eyes. "She's terrified, Samuel. I saw it. And her story aligns with what we saw at the distribution center. The Annoxi are expanding." "Or she's a very good actress," Samuel countered, his voice low and guttural, fueled by years of paranoia. "Remember the whispers about the Collector? The one who could mimic human behavior perfectly, lure survivors into traps? What if this journal is bait? What if she's leading us to the base for them?" He gestured vaguely towards the quiet corner where April slept, a figure so small and vulnerable, yet now, through Samuel's eyes, imbued with a chilling potential for deception. "Her story, the way she appeared. It almost sounds like she was sent." Simone didn't dismiss his concerns. She knew the dangers of trusting too easily in this twisted world. The line between survivor and predator was often blurred, and desperation could make allies out of the cruelest enemies. The thought that April, the desperate girl who clutched a journal of forgotten maps, might be a wolf in sheep's clothing, sent a fresh wave of ice through Simone's veins. But the military base, the promise of resources, of a stronger foothold against the encroaching winter and the growing threat of the Annoxi, was too tempting to ignore. The air in the sanctuary, already heavy with the scent of decay and fear, now tasted of mistrust. The greatest drama was not just the external threats, but the fracturing of their own fragile hope, threatened by the very possibility of salvation. The silence hung heavy between them, thick with unspoken fears. Simone's decision was firm, but the seeds of doubt Samuel had planted gnawed at her, adding another layer of treachery to an already impossible situation. How could she tell the difference between desperate truth and a calculated trap? The military base, with its promise of salvation and its whispered horrors, beckoned, a siren call in the wasteland. But was April a guide, or a sacrifice? The answer, Simone knew with a chilling certainty, would only be found deep within the unforgiving heart of the base itself. The next morning, a subtle chill settled over the group, colder than the biting wind outside. April was still curled on her cot, but now she was awake, her gaze fixed on the journal. Simone approached, her usual directness softened by the need for cooperation. "April," she began, "that journal. Can you show me these ghost gates?" April hesitated, her fingers tracing the worn leather. "My father. He had an obsession with the hidden. He believed the world was full of secrets, even before the turning." She slowly opened the journal, revealing pages filled with intricate, hand-drawn schematics, not just of the military base, but of other forgotten government installations. The precision was breathtaking, a testament to her father's meticulous nature. But what truly caught Simone's eye were the annotations, scrawled in a frantic, almost feverish hand in the margins. These weren't technical notes, they were observations, theories about the virus itself. "He called it the primal strain," April whispered, her voice barely audible. "He thought it wasn't just a disease, but an evolutionary acceleration. He believed the military base was where they were studying it, trying to weaponize it, even after it went rogue." A shiver went down Simone's spine. Weaponize the turning? The implications were monstrous. But then April pointed to a specific page, her finger landing on a crudely drawn symbol next to a section marked Section C, Sublevel 7. "This is where he believed they had the most sensitive experiments. And this symbol, she tapped a small, almost invisible glyph, means containment breach, irreversible. He never explained why, just that this particular breach was different. Worse. Samuel, who had approached silently, his suspicion a palpable aura, leaned over April's shoulder. His gaze fell on a particularly disturbing entry, a series of dates, each followed by a single word, loss. Silence. Whispers. Below the last entry, scribbled in what looked like her father's failing hand, was a chilling addendum: they adapt. Not just the flesh, but the mind. The Fingil are merely the roots. The true horror blossoms where sanity wilts. April suddenly slammed the journal shut, her eyes wide and panicked. "That's enough," she cried, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. My father. He went mad. He started seeing things, hearing things. He believed the Bjinars were communicating. Not just in groans, but in patterns, in the way the Fingil grew." Her eyes darted around the room, as if expecting to see patterns in the dust. He said the base was trying to control them, to bend the turning to their will. But he believed it was twisting them instead, turning them into something else. Her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper, a confession wrenched from the depths of her fear. He saw what they were becoming. He tried to warn people. That's why he got caught. She clutched the journal to her chest, her knuckles white, her gaze now fixed on Simone, pleading for understanding, for belief. He wasn't just cartographer, he was a bioacoustic engineer. He thought he could find a frequency, a counter-signal, to disrupt the Annoxi's control. But the last entry. The whispers. He said it was the Bjinars whispering back. Not the Annoxi controlling them, but the Bjinars themselves. Reaching out. A cold knot tightened in Simone's stomach. Samuel's earlier warning about the collector echoed in her mind, amplified by April's chilling revelation. What if April's father hadn't gone mad, but had simply seen too much? And what if April herself was not just a survivor, but a carrier of a far more insidious truth, one that could unravel their minds before the Bjinars or the Annoxi even got to their bodies? The knowledge in that journal, the cryptic warnings, felt less like a map to salvation and more like an invitation to a deeper, more profound darkness. The faint scent of rotting wood and stale hope in the department store seemed to be replaced by the acrid tang of ozone and something indescribably ancient, echoing the horror April had just described. The path to the military base was no longer just a physical journey through a broken world, but a descent into a psychological labyrinth, where sanity itself was a luxury they could no longer afford. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every creak of the old building took on a sinister resonance. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their very minds. Simone stared at April, her mind racing. The details were too specific, too terrifying, to be mere ramblings of a traumatized girl. "April," Simone pressed, her voice urgent, "this containment breach, irreversible. What was breached? What was released?" April's eyes, wide and unfocused, seemed to look beyond them, into some unseen horror. He called it the echo. Not a sound, but a resonance. It amplified the turning, sped it up. Made them smarter. More connected. He said it was like a dark consciousness, spreading through the Fingil, binding the Bjinars. The base wasn't just studying a virus, they were trying to cultivate a hive mind. And it got out. She shuddered violently, as if a chill wind had passed directly through her. The Annoxi. They don't control the Bjinars. They're just following the loudest signal. The echo. Samuel, his face a mask of grim realization, took a step back from April, his rifle now held more like a barrier than a weapon. "The collector," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "That's how it lures us. It's not mimicking, it's reaching out. It feeds on our fear, our desperation. It's in the whispers April's father heard. It's in the patterns of the Fingil." His eyes darted to the ceiling, to the dust motes dancing in the dim light, suddenly seeing sinister geometry in every mundane detail. "It's a contagion of thought," he breathed, "a horror worse than any physical wound." Simone's gaze hardened, a new, terrifying resolve taking root. The military base, the very place where these experiments were rumored to have taken place, was no longer just a place for resources, it was the origin point of their nightmare. And April, with her father's chilling legacy, was the unwilling key. "We go to the base," Simone declared, her voice ringing with grim determination, cutting through the growing sense of dread. "Not just for supplies, but for answers. We have to understand this echo. If the Annoxi are just pawns, then there's something far worse pulling the strings. And if we don't stop it, there will be nothing left but silence." The air crackled with a newfound, terrifying purpose. They were no longer merely survivors, They were about to become unwilling participants in a cosmic horror, a desperate gamble against a consciousness that transcended flesh and reason. The true fight, Simone knew, was just beginning. The decision to venture to the old military base, somewhere in the heart of the American Midwest, settled over the group like a lead shroud. It was a choice born of desperation, fueled by the chilling revelations of April's journal. The cold winds of the approaching winter were a physical threat, but the echo and the Annoxi's twisted connection to it presented a far more insidious, existential one. The thought of confronting a contagion of thought, a malevolent consciousness that warped the very essence of existence, twisted their insides into a cold knot. Simone, despite her outward resolve, felt the weight of every life entrusted to her. She knew the base was not just a gamble, it was a roll of the dice in the dark, with sanity itself on the table. Their immediate priority shifted from mere survival to a grim preparation for an enemy they barely understood. The hours leading up to their departure were a flurry of grim, purposeful activity. Each action was imbued with a heightened sense of urgency, a silent acknowledgement that this would be their most dangerous venture yet. Samuel, his paranoia now fused with a chilling validation, became obsessed with finding anything that could muffle sound or provide even a sliver of psychological defense. He meticulously stripped old curtains, torn fabrics, and even the remaining lingerie, hoping to create makeshift wraps for their ears, theorizing that even a slight dampening might disrupt the echo's influence. He also started rigging crude, one-way mirrors from shattered shop displays, hoping to observe without being observed, a desperate attempt to gain an edge against an enemy that could reach into their minds. Mark oversaw the grim task of inventorying their dwindling arsenal. They had a handful of scavenged firearms, Samuel's rifle, a rusty pistol, and a battered shotgun with only a few shells. Their spears and bladed weapons, sharpened against broken concrete, would be their primary defense against the physical threat of the Bjinars. Lena worked on concocting rudimentary incendiaries from discarded aerosols and old cleaning fluids, hoping the harsh chemicals might deter the Bjinars or at least slow their unnatural movements. April, though still visibly shaken, was tasked with poring over her father's journal. Simone sat with her for hours, deciphering the cryptic notes, tracing the ghost gates on the faded blueprints. April spoke of hidden ventilation shafts, forgotten service tunnels, and even a rumored, long decommissioned wastewater drain that could offer an unforeseen entry point, or a deadly trap. The map in the journal wasn't just a guide, it was a puzzle, each line and symbol a potential key or a perilous misdirection. Simone insisted on memorizing key sections, knowing that in the labyrinthine darkness of the base, a misplaced page could mean their death. The most challenging preparation was for the psychological assault. Lena, drawing on her nursing background, tried to instill a sense of mental discipline. She encouraged short, sharp bursts of conversation, discouraging prolonged silence, hoping to ground them in reality and ward off the insidious whispers April's father had described. Simone also ordered them to focus on small, mundane tasks, to consciously observe their surroundings, anything to keep their minds from drifting into the abstract, terrifying patterns that the echo might exploit. They shared stories, sang old, broken songs under their breath, anything to fill the void that the echo sought to exploit. The hardest decision was who would remain behind. Simone chose the sickest, the weakest, and the youngest to stay in the department store, with Lena and a small cache of their remaining supplies. It was a heartbreaking choice, a gamble on two fronts, but sending them into the base was a guaranteed death sentence. The parting was grim, marked by unspoken farewells and the hollow echoes of fear. As dusk bled across the sky, painting the ruins in hues of bruised purple and ominous red, the group stood ready. Their faces, gaunt and etched with fatigue, held a desperate glint in their eyes. They were no longer just survivors, they were voyagers into the heart of their own terror, armed with a few crude weapons, a fragmented map, and a desperate hope that understanding the nightmare might somehow offer a chance at reclaiming a sliver of their shattered world. Simone, after agonizing over April's journal, settled on a specific entry point into the military base. It wasn't the easiest or the most direct, but it offered the greatest chance of avoiding immediate confrontation and gaining a tactical advantage. "We go through the decommissioned wastewater culvert, Ghost Gate Delta 7, Simone announced, her voice low and firm, drawing a trembling finger across the grime-stained schematic in April's journal. April's father marked it as low security, unstable structure. "It's a risk, but it's less likely to be actively guarded by the Annoxi, who would prefer more obvious sentry points. And the echo might be weaker down there, diluted by the ambient noise and the sheer physical barrier of the earth above." The culvert was described as a labyrinthine network of crumbling pipes and claustrophobic tunnels, prone to collapses and flooding. It was a treacherous path, requiring them to crawl through tight spaces, navigate unstable debris, and face the stench of decades of accumulated filth. But its very unpleasantness and inherent dangers were what made it less appealing to the Annoxi and, hopefully, to the Bjinnar too. April's father had also sketched a faint, almost invisible symbol next to Delta 7, a stylized ear with a broken wave. He said it might have a unique acoustic signature, April whispered, her voice barely audible. A kind of dead zone for certain frequencies. If the echo is a sound, a resonance, this might be where its influence is weakest. This wasn't just about avoiding a fight, it was about seeking a momentary refuge, a place where their minds might be spared the insidious whispers of the echo long enough to formulate a plan. It was a descent into the forgotten underbelly of the base, a gamble that the filth and darkness would offer a shield against the horrors above. As they prepared to descend into the rank darkness of the culvert, a new kind of dread settled over the group. The physical dangers were obvious, but the unknown horrors lurking in the suffocating darkness, amplified by the lingering fear of the echo, felt far more oppressive. What unexpected challenges or discoveries might they encounter as they navigate the decommissioned wastewater culvert?